Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Crespo, your host for today and forever, and welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. But let's talk about what we're doing today. Today we have another extraordinary guest. He's a St. Louis University School of Law graduate and currently works as the founder and creative director at Contender. He's held past positions as the co-founder of the Rowdy Creative and as the director of business development at Mission Matters Group. Super excited to have him on the podcast today, Mr. Tony Albrecht. Welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today?
Before going any further, I'd like to say a quick word about the sponsor of this podcast, Rhetoric. Back in episode 25, I had the privilege of having the CEO, Luke Yingling, on the podcast, and ever since that episode, fell in love with the product. Rhetoric takes user briefs and motions and compares them against the text of opinions written by judges to identify ways to tailor their arguments to better persuade the judges handling their cases. Rhetoric's focus on persuasion and helps users find new ways to improve their odds of success through more persuasive arguments. Know more, win more. I was able to see a demo of the product, and its cutting-edge technology and fascinating features make for a product I am proud to sponsor, and further shows the new digital era the field of law has been entering thus far on my journey doing this podcast. If you decide to book a demo, let them know Nate sent you. Be sure to check them out in the show notes below or at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com. Now, back to the show.
So far, so good, Nate. Thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to talking to you, kid. What you've been doing out here has been really interesting to me and really impressive. That your podcast popped up on my radar, a month or two ago, seeing like all the impressive names that you've brought in from across the LinkedIn sphere. I'm excited to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, but I appreciate the kind words already. And I try my best. But Tony, before we get started, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm from St. Louis initially. You mentioned St. Louis University School of Law. I graduated from law school in 2009. I start there because, as you mentioned, I'm the founder of a marketing agency, which I've been doing now for 18 months. But in between now and when I graduated from law school, did practice law for 12 years. There's a story in there where I torched my career once in 2013, quitting my job, selling all my stuff, and taking a one-way ticket to Bangkok. But the lawyers in the making idea is one I'm interested in. Though I told you, Nate, that I'm the one you talk to when you want to get talked out of going to law school. That's who I am at this point. So be careful. But I grew up in St. Louis, went to college, and actually, I guess I technically have 3 schools on my transcript, but all in Missouri, and basically wanted to be a writer. I thought I was going to be a writer. I now understand that I probably should have just been writing and starting companies from the time I was 21 years old. And I really shouldn't have gone to law school, which we will be diving into, which is not to say nobody should go to law school, but it was the wrong fit for me, I think. And I went for the wrong reasons. And so I think that, how's that by way of introduction?
It was beautifully said. I can't complain with that sort of introduction. And I think to your point, though, that is the main focus of this podcast, that not only is there no straight path to law school or the law itself, and you have your own unique journey. Everyone has their own unique journey. But even before that point, in deciding to go to law school, to see if it really is a fit for you. So even if you may be dissuading people from going to law school, it's still an amazing thing because they may find that unique path that fits them, and law school may not be in it. And it's still an important point to make. But this is an interesting one. This is
Mhm.
a special one. You had let me know that you would rather start in the middle, straight to the meat and potatoes of your journey.
Mhm.
And this happened, you were at a Cardinals game in 2021 with some partners at a law firm, and you had decided to pick up and leave. So let's start there, and we could go backwards. So tell us a little bit about that. What was going on there? Explain.
Yeah. So, well, that you're referring to a LinkedIn post of mine that actually went up this morning. You had me thinking back on that would have been the inflection point where I was leaving uh, St. Louis. I was leaving the U.S. And eventually basically leaving not just that firm, but the practice of law, where by early 2021, uh, uh, late 2020, I was on track to make partner at a mid-sized insurance defense firm. I had a really good gig where I had spent most of my career working in insurance defense, uh, mostly handling asbestos cases in sort of that there's this cluster of venues around St. Louis, in Missouri and Illinois that basically are some of the biggest, or really the biggest, asbestos dockets in the country. And I say I had a good gig because I had a high quality of life. Uh, I got to work with people I liked, and at that firm I was working for, the managing partner of that office was also a good friend of mine, and um, my wife and I had made the decision at the end of 2020 that we were going to move to Canada, where she's from. We may touch on how my wife and I met in India in 2015, but she had agreed after we got married to move to St. Louis and told me I had 5 years. And sure enough, she meant it. So we we made the decision to move, and that decision was basically, do we stay in St. Louis? I make partner, and then at that point, it's a golden handcuff situation where it would have been really hard to detach and walk away from the money. Or do we pick up, move to Canada, which then would mean partner's going to be off the table. They probably won't fire you, but you're on a dead end track. And I didn't really want to do that forever anyway. So then what? Um, Obviously, that's what we decided to do. And I ended up staying with that firm for another 6 months from Canada. This was, in the middle of COVID, so we were all remote all the time. Um, and at that point, I found myself in a position of trying to figure out, all right, if being an attorney has been really like how I've made my living, from my mid 20s, uh, what do you do at when you're starting over at 39 years old, in another country where my wife spent most of her life in Toronto, but we decided to move up to the woods, like a couple hours north. I was actually like in the middle, kind of like we live in the woods on like a property with some land, and we back up to like some real wilderness. They're like moose and bears out there. It's like it's legit. But yeah, it was stressful, but really, I mean, it's a time I'll look back on fondly. I mean, it was a huge turning point for me.
So clearly, any way you look at something like that, it's a huge risk. It's a huge risk that you're taking. You leave a ton of money on the table, you're leaving a job. So can you talk a little bit about taking that risk, being able to take that risk? What sort of mindset did you have to put yourself in order to make that huge jump?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are two quotes I use liberally. One is in that post you just referenced. It's from the writer Ray Bradbury, where it says, "We must continually be jumping off cliffs and growing wings on the way down." There's another one from a Buddhist teacher whose name escapes me like every time. He's one of the Rinpoches, but it's something to the effect of the bad news is that you're falling through the air. The good news is there is no ground. And yeah, I think of those two lines in tandem as the one saying there is value in making those leaps, like those leaps in and of themselves, those moments where you decide, you make the decision, or for me, so often in my life, and it's happened a few times, it's like, it's almost more like the decision happens to you. You bear witness to the decision being made, where what you have been doing is not what you will be doing. And something is going to change. There's value in that moment, and then the other being that we're so I think we're wired to be risk averse, right? Reptilian brain and all that. Like we're 5 times as likely to remember something negative as something positive. That sort of. There's research on that. We can Google it, but we're so scared. And I'll say for me personally, right? Like going through the law, going through my career, going through school, really what led me to law school in the first place. When I say I went for the wrong reasons, I went because I was scared, right? And I was scared of failing. I was scared of disappointing my parents. I was scared of not being as smart or as talented as I thought I was, and that I wanted you to think I was. Um, I was scared of not being successful. And so like all those fears have a tendency to they kept me looking for the safe path, right? I wanted the safe, predictable path to success, wealth, and happiness. So that line about, you're falling, but the good news is there is no ground. That one's about, after you've made the decision to take the leap, you're in liminal space, right? That space between what was and what will be. And it's a deeply uncomfortable place to be. And from the time I was a teenager through much of my 20s, we've made almost 15 minutes in this podcast, and I haven't mentioned my coming to Jesus moment in a Guamanian jail cell. But you the what I've learned for myself is not only do I not need to be afraid of the liminal spaces, but it's actually where I need to be. I thrive and I do my best when I am in pursuit of that next thing, or like that better version of myself, or that better life. And so I think that I'm actually thinking about whether I answered your question about what was the mindset that led to that. Like the mindset in that moment in 2020, 2021 was really like the life you want is most likely on the other side of a leap. And all those things you're worried about happening or you're afraid will happen, they might happen. Those worst case scenarios, they're possible, probably aren't going to happen. And actually, what's probably going to happen more likely is you'll figure it out and everything will work out. And I had the rep of learning that when I torched my career for the first time 10 years, or at that point, it would have been like 7, 8 years earlier. But I'll pause there.
No, I mean, first of all, I'd just like to say I appreciate so much the raw honesty coming out of you right now, because I appreciate it so much just for the pure fact that people out there could hear this, relate so much to it, and be like, hey, maybe I could do this too. Maybe I could take that risk. And something that you talked about that kind of tipped me off to something else is that in terms of finding those fears that you may have. Something that I learned from Tim Ferriss, who I love very much, one of my favorite podcasters, a real OG of the podcasting game. But he talks about a monthly exercise he does is fear setting. So he talks about the worst fears and the worst things that could possibly happen to him, and he lists them out. So when he does that, he's like, "Oh, you know what? It's really not that bad. Like, what's the worst that could happen? This is the worst that could happen." So that's something that tipped me off to that. That's something that I've been doing for the past couple months that have really helped me out in terms of being present in the moment, just like you said, it being in that middle ground of what will happen and what has happened. It's a scary place, but when you realize that it's not as scary as it looks, then it's really not that bad, and you flow effortlessly through it. But I want to go back because
What
I want
can
no, go
I,
ahead.
well, can I flip it around for a second? Uh,
Absolutely.
what are you when you're doing those exercises, listing your fears? What's what's coming out on those lists for you right now for
Well,
where
I
you're
think
at? You said you're a junior
I'm a
at
junior in college.
right on. Yeah.
So I think many times I think when I first started doing it, it was a lot of fear of what people were gonna think, what my friends were gonna think, what my friends at home were gonna think, what my parents were gonna think about it. Um, and a lot of it had to do with if I'm doing this podcast and I'm leaning towards not, going to law school immediately after college, what am I going to do then? And I think that was definitely the big fear that I have. And I have a post-it note above me. And I talk in terms of motion. I don't know why. It's just me. It's just how me and my brother talk to each other. But we talk in terms of motion. So, I felt doing this podcast, I had a lot of motion going on in terms of things that I can make an impact. And so I write up there, I said, how am I going to make money? How am I going to make a living? How am I going to capitalize on this motion? And so that was sort of a fear that I had. And especially like I definitely say like a month or two ago, that was really setting in like, oh my God, like what am I gonna do? And obviously, I think about my parents as well. My mom, she's like, you got to finish college, you got to get through it. But what are you gonna do after it? And it was a big question for me to answer. And I think the fact that I wrote it down, the fact that I'm cognizant of it at all times of the day, I put it on my wall. So when I wake up in the morning, I look at it and I see it, and I'm like, okay, I know what I have to do. So those are the types of things that have really come up over time. And I think it's really helped me in terms of blocking out the noise, not allowing what other people think to influence how I'm doing and what I want to do, just making sure I'm putting out the highest quality stuff and that the stuff that I make, I enjoy. And I'm like, oh, that looks good.
Yeah. That a lot of that resonates, man. And well, okay, so you're coming up on the end of your junior year. You're on track to finish in 4 years.
Yes, next year I graduate.
Okay. So what I was hearing from you there, you've got fears around the uncertainty of what happens at that point. Am I hearing that right?
That is absolutely true. And I think one of the realizations I really had is just from the stuff that has happened so far doing this podcast, especially just like yesterday. I'll throw it out there right now, but Tony was kind enough to send me a gift card to Dan Carlin's store because I love hardcore history. And it's just like something like that. Like I could have never imagined that that was gonna happen. So I don't even know what the hell's gonna happen tomorrow. So the fact I'm worrying about something a year in advance, like it's good to have long-term thinking, but I'm a big experimenter. And I think taking those 2 week experiments, those month experiments, and see what happens. If it works, if it doesn't work, you just move on to the next thing. And it really allowed me to be present in the moment. One of the things, something like being present in the moment, something that my brother said one time that I thought was very insightful. I like my brother, he's cool. But something that, well, my mom, every time, my whole life, every time she picks up a penny, she says, pick a penny, pick it up. All day long, you have good luck. And something that my brother said was like, I see pennies all the time because I feel that I'm so present in the moment that I could see it. I'm not, thinking about something else, thinking about what happened yesterday, thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm just focused on what I'm doing now, either, walking in the store or going to the gym. And I see all these pennies. And that next week when he said that, I found 3 pennies. And that's when I knew. I was like, okay, things are good. Things are good. So that's definitely something I'd like to work on in my life. And I feel like it's helped me tremendously.
What's your brother's name?
His name is Chris.
Is he older or younger?
He is 3 years older than me. I also have
Cool.
another
What's
brother.
Chris doing?
I don't want to forget about Nick Crespo. Nick Crespo is still out there. My other brother as well, but I talk to them every day. I'm very, very close with my brothers. So Chris currently he does a lot of stuff in the music industry as of right now. Me, him, and my other brother, but it's really just my brother Chris. He's like the main guy. We manage artists. So we have 3 artists currently right now who are managing getting them concerts, getting them deals, doing promotion for them, all that stuff. So that's really what he's doing. But everything very much overlaps, and we're always talking to each other. We have to. I can't not.
Cool. Cool. That penny idea of like just seeing opportunities, right? Just being present and letting the world come. Um, I it's an idea that I have embraced really only after law school, where my my drinking got out of control through law school, and it was, I think, related to being on just a path that wasn't a very good fit for me. I understand now, and so when you say that you appreciate the rawness or the honesty, I've had to do some real work, Nate. I've had to like do the work on processing a whole lot of stuff in great detail in a way that eventually you integrate it and it becomes part of the narrative of who I was on the path to here. Um, in a way that it's not raw anymore, right? It's just part of the story, that I hope not to go back to. I don't want to go back to that chapter of the story. But as a you know, as I was going through law school, uh, and just kind of descending into addiction, the way I see it now is so much of that was, I think, related to this feeling that I had a specific point, a destination point that would mark success, right? So it's like I'm trying to find my way to get to this specific thing out in the future. So I'm just looking for the right hoops to jump through, and I'm just trying to jump through the right hoops one after another. And it sucked jumping through hoops. I don't really like jumping through hoops. I would much rather go out looking for pennies, right? But I wasn't in that place where I could see it that way. And so good on you for like recognizing that for where you are now. Um, and yeah, well, I'll tell you what, you were about to go somewhere else. I'll resist the urge to keep pulling the threads around what your future might look like, at least for a minute. But we'll probably circle back to that. I'm interested.
Absolutely. Well, I'm flipping the conversation back. Um,
Please.
so see, here's what's interesting. Usually I start at law school and then I do a little I unintentionally discriminate people based on their age. And I'm like, oh, I was
Mm.
this old when you had left law school. I won't do this to you, I promise. But it was 2009. I was 6 years old. Like, see, I did it again. So you
Mhm.
had left law school, but I want to talk about the struggles of law school because you had some struggles. So can you talk about the struggles
Mhm.
going through law school and how you overcame them in some way, shape, or form?
Um, I did see it as a bunch of jumping through hoops. Although I listened to your episode with Patrick Patino last night, and Patrick was talking about how he actually liked law school. And I think like ultimately, I think I liked law school also, but again, probably not for the right reasons. Like for me, I was, I mean, the way I describe myself as an emotional man child who wasn't ready to grow up. So I was one of those idiots for whom law school was a way to avoid growing up. Uh, and I, when I think about what the actual challenges were, um, you know, I'll write on LinkedIn periodically about how legal education is kind of broken. I think just the model of a bunch of reading. One test is how you measure whether you understand the material. Everything, I shouldn't say everything, almost everything in law school is theory based, and like they talk about laying the foundations of understanding legal principles and precedent. When it just strikes me as bizarre and maybe even absurd that we make it through law school and then the vast majority of us are totally incapable of actually handling a case, and that there's just nothing focused on the practice for the most part. Um, but all that said, like reading and writing are two things that come very naturally to me. So um, I actually didn't mind it. I didn't mind the reading. I didn't mind the writing. I was a managing editor of a law review. I clerked for 2 years at a plaintiff's personal injury firm, um, where it was a good way to get some experience while I was going through law school. And then I would, like I mentioned, the drinking. I wasn't the sort of person who drank every day, but I was the sort of person who would go just overindulge, consistently. And uh, my life sort of, let's say I held space in my weeks for those those events, those nights. Um, and honestly, that was maybe the biggest challenge, is that by the time I'm approaching the end of my second year, uh, I I landed in an ER for the second time, like because of a booze related injury. And I it's just the consequences were starting to get more severe. And so I'm in the ER literally 2 days before finals start. And it was the like juggling the consequences of my boozing with class, with work, and really just with the dysfunction of where I was uh, as a person. I think that was that is how I remember my law school. I primarily remember just like how I was in a bad spot.
Yeah, to your point back when you said that the law school system is probably not the best for in terms of practical use, that you just learn theory, you're just looking at plain text, applying facts to the law. I know back on all the way back on episode 6, it's funny I'm saying all the way back, but all the way back on episode 6, I have Patrick Eckler, and he went on like a 25-minute tangent about how he hated law school, the way that it does. He thinks the third year is useless, that you get no practical knowledge, that he thinks that the third year should be purely dedicated to just practicing, actually going out there
Mm.
and doing it. So that reminded me of that. But I have to ask a question,
Yeah.
because you had said that reading and writing came naturally to you. Now, how did you figure that out?
Uh, how to figure what that they came now? I mean, they just did that. I mean, I was that kid who would I mean, I remember going to the library in the summer and just taking the stack of 10 books that I had just blown through in the 2 weeks prior and just wanting to grab that next stack of 10 books, like maxing out how many books I could take out of the library. Um, and I think that from the time I'm 8, 9, 10 years old. Um, and as for the writing, I, my I could be wrong on this, but my recollection is uh, writer was what I wanted to be. It's like the first job other than, let's say, baseball player that I was interested in having. I wasn't gonna make it as a baseball player. My fastball topped out at about 66. It wasn't gonna even though I was left-handed, it wasn't gonna happen for me. Um, but yeah, so the writing was something that I took to rather early. Uh, by the time I was in high school, I was writing in the school literary journal and for the newspaper and writing short stories and fancying myself a future novelist who would write the next great American novel. And that hasn't happened yet, but I guess we still got time. The great American and Canada novel. Is that what I would write now? Um, but yeah, so I guess that for me it just it is what I was naturally inclined to do, right? Well, and that's part of why I went to law school, right? It's like, well, I like to read. There's a lot of reading. Writing is a huge skill for lawyers, right? Um, and lawyers, you know, it's easier to make money as a lawyer than it is as a writer. So I was, there was a minute there where I was choosing, again, referencing Patrick, where on that episode, he's talking about how he uh, got a degree in creative writing. Forget if he said he actually got an MFA, but I was considering going that route, going for a master's in creative writing or going to law school. And I'm not sure an MFA in creative writing would have done me any better, to be honest. I think it also would have been expensive. I think I would have had a hard time getting a real job like on the back end of that. And I'm probably still in a bad spot in terms of my like spiritual health and my addiction situation, even if I'd done that. So maybe I'd be in a worse spot. So maybe law school saved me from what would have happened had I gone to creative writing school. How about that, Nate? I've never said that before. That's a new insight.
I mean, I think something that Jonah Perlin said when I had him on, he talked about Cal Newport, how he says when you look backwards, everything makes sense. Everything just
Mhm.
makes sense. But when you're looking forward, nothing makes sense. Everything's uncertain. It's all the unknown, which I love. I actually love the unknown. But I know very well. I remember the day that my hoop dreams died. So don't worry. As much my listen, my 3-point percentage wasn't high enough to be a college basketball player. I had to realize that I had to step
Mm.
away from the game. I still played in high school, but I at one point in my life I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna play college basketball," because my brother played college basketball. And I was like, "Oh, I want to do the same thing." But then I was like, I'm not that good. I can't do that." So, I went a
Mm.
different route. It's totally okay. But I want to know this coming to Jesus moment because you said you were in I don't what country was that and which
The island of Guam. So Guam is an American territory over there in the Pacific, the Marianas Islands. It's about a 3-hour flight from Tokyo. And uh, I finished law school in 2009. The recession was not going well. Um, and my best job offer was to join a solo practitioner who had gone to SLU Law, was from Guam, then had gone back. and he posted something on the Sleuth site. Well, it looks kind of interesting. And I think it was literally 4 weeks after seeing the post, I was on a flight and uh, I spent a year over there, but it was Thanksgiving night of 2009. I'd been on the island for about 3 months at that point, and yeah, I mean, it was just I drank too much and I got behind the wheel, and thank God I didn't hurt anybody, and the cops got me, and so I describe it as I regained consciousness in a jail cell. I have no memory of how I got there. Um, and a line that has come to mean a lot to me since then is one I picked up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So you hit rock bottom when you stop digging. And for me, it was that night that I stopped digging. Uh, there was a lot of work to be done at that point. That was the point where the work began. Um, and it would be another 6 months. Is that right? May 29th, 2010. I have the date tattooed on my wrist, the date of my last drink, which was another one of those moments that I'm talking about where a decision, it's almost like you more bear witness to it, where um, I went with a buddy to Japan, spent a weekend in Japan, and from the time of that arrest, I'd only had a drink once in the preceding 6 months or so. And we were in Osaka and we had just landed and we were going out, and I was like, I think I want to have a Guinness. And he was like, you sure, dude? I was like, I think I do. And he's like, all right, I'll keep an eye on you. And it ended up being like a perfect night, like one of those nights that just was everything I loved about booze, where it just, we're in this like really vibrant area of Osaka, Japan, and I've never been to Japan before, so it's my first night, and I'd never actually been to Asia at that point. That was my first like day really in Asia, and so I was like meeting a bunch of people, and we're just right around, like go to like place that had like sushi on the conveyor belts, which my Midwestern ass had never seen before, and that was incredible to me. And I ended up walking home through the empty streets of Osaka as the sky was lightening to gray, and laid down on the tatami mat in the hotel. Woke up 4 hours later to catch a train to Kyoto, and I haven't wanted a drink since. That it was gone. Like the desire to drink just left. And that's I I can call that nothing but grace, that whatever happened there. I know it was a product of a lot of the work that had happened in between in those 6 months. But yeah. So there you go. You took me down another rabbit hole there, Nate. There's a story for you.
I gotta go to Japan. It's enlightening, clearly. My God.
It was awesome. Yeah, Japan's fantastic.
We got like a new TV in my den, and it's like super four, it's like 8K, whatever. I don't know. It's like the highest definition. So when we first got it, me and my whole family would just sit there and we watch people like walk through Tokyo and just fascinated by it. It is a beautiful, beautiful place. I gotta get there. See, I have a long bucket list. People tell me places I have to go. So it's ever growing. It is ever growing. And I guess so I gotta get there soon. That's the next spot. But going forward from that, you then became an associate attorney at Herzog Krebs, and you did that for 3 years. And then 2013, you had decided to step away from the law. So why'd you step away from the law?
Well, so that's when I started to come to terms really with that I shouldn't have become a lawyer. So that was when I went back to St. Louis after that year in Guam, and good friend of mine, Brian Wacker, who actually now occupies my corner office in the last firm that I left in 2021. It all came full circle. He came and joined the firm that I had gone to in 2017, and we basically passed like ships in the night. Where I was leaving the law and he moved into my office. But he landed me the job with the firm where they were looking for an associate attorney for their asbestos team. And that job at that time was this very peculiar, really sweet gig where I mainly just flew around the country taking depositions. So in 2.5 years, I got to 38 states, and I think I went to uh, like Detroit like 12 times, like Milwaukee 8 times, like just like constantly going. And so at that time I'm, mid late 20s, single, no kids, and I'm just stashing frequent flyer miles. And then I also that time this I think they fixed these rackets, Nate. You can't do this stuff anymore, but we could bill for travel time there. So if I'm flying to Seattle from St. Louis, you hit the clock when you leave your house and get the Seattle 8 hours later, get in the hotel, like that's when you go off the clock. And in that 8 hours, I will have spent, 4 of that just reading. And so like in that time, I was I was blowing through a book a week basically for those 2 years. And so much of what I was reading was stuff that was sort of the mind opening stuff. There was a lot of philosophy, there was a lot of history, there was um, a lot of creativity related stuff. And the further down those rabbit holes I went, the more, it's like there's a line from the poet Mary Oliver that came to be really important to me is, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And there came a point where I was like, it's probably not this. And I mean, I still had a ton of student loans, right, from law school. And I, my family, to think about, like that feeling of disappointing parents, and just failing at life, just like being a loser, for lack of a better term, like just that sense uh, of pressure to like stay on the straight and narrow, right? Um, but there was one of those moments. I was driving to a deposition in Paducah, Kentucky, which is about a 5-hour drive from St. Louis. It was raining. It's December 2012. I'm listening to a podcast it was like a Buddhist podcast about a life well lived. What does it mean to live life well? And someone just snapped. And I'm quitting my job. And at that point, it would be another 6 months before my last day at that firm. But at that point, it was just logistics. It was, okay, so you need to save money. You need to figure out how you're going to stay right on your student loans. You need to figure out what you're going to do if you're going to take this time. And eventually I came up with a plan to take it a year to travel in Southeast Asia. That plan ended up not working out as intended. But what began as taking that flight to Bangkok, Thailand in June of 2013, intending to be there for a year, it ended up turning into 4 years between full-time roles, where actually I ended up working as a contract attorney remotely before it was cool for the firm that I walked away from, where they ended up calling and asking if I would be interested in working at all, which was not a thing that I had occurred to me as possible when I decided to quit. I think it speaks to the penny idea, right? That's saying just being open to things, right? That if you're open and you're there, opportunities can find you. Whereas if you're focused on one thing that's out there, just that tunnel vision, I never would have seen that opportunity because I would have still been sitting in that office, not knowing what color the wall was behind my computer desk, right? Um, so I'll pause there after another diatribe. You got me talking too much, man.
Oh, well, no, listen, I mean, you're the guest here. You have many interesting things to say. And I am like 20 years old that don't have that much life experience. You have immense amounts of life experience. That's what we're here for. But I
Super
think
old.
I,
Yeah.
I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean it like that. Um, but I think to what you're saying though is absolutely true. When you're open to the universe, they're gonna give you things. You're bound to get things. Things are gonna come across you. And you're gonna be like, all right, we're gonna take these opportunities. You're able to see much more things. Another post-it,
Mhm.
actually the first post-it note when I moved into this apartment that I put up. And I always put up this post-it note. It was in my room at home, it was everywhere. And it just says, the universe is on your side. That's all it says. But, having that mindset, be able to cultivate that mindset, being able to be open to the universe and it being open to you. I know this is very crazy talk, spiritual talk, but I am a bit crazy, bit spiritual in that type of way. And I think it's very important to be open and spiritual just like that because you get those opportunities and you could see everything. You could be cognizant of everything. And clearly you embody that through your experience. Now, you
Have you read The Alchemist?
I actually have not, but I know people who have read it and I really want to read it. I
All
should
right,
read it.
I'm gonna send you that book.
Oh my
But
God.
there's a line in there. Uh, it's when you pursue your personal legend, the universe conspires to help you on your way. And yeah, it seems to be true, right? To your point about it being it may sound a little woo woo. At some point in my life, I would have thought it so. I, to be honest with you, I still think it's a little. I don't understand. I don't understand how it works, but I've seen enough in my own life and in the lives of the people around me to believe that seems to be true.
I think I might just be like naturally woo-woo. Just like I don't know why. I'm naturally inclined towards the weird and the unknown. I've always been fascinated. Like I was one of those people, I was like scared of the dark. So I never like knew what was gonna happen. Like when I'm sitting in my room and it's late at night and I look up at the wall and it looks like there's a person behind me. I'm like, oh my God, there's a person. But stuff like that, I sort of I've always leaned into that stuff. I'm much more interested in the profound and the big and the woo woo. I love the woo woo. I have to say, I love that word too. But as we go on, so you were working remotely till 2017, I suppose, and then you became
Yeah.
an associate attorney at McGivney, Kluber, Clark, and Intonacci. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that wasn't the name of the firm back then. It was a different uh, uh, collection of partners back then, but that was fairly close.
I try. I always try with the names. I always test myself, see if I could get them. But so you decide to go back. Why'd you go back to the law?
Um, so halfway through that 4 year period, I was in India and went to do 10 days in silence, try a silent meditation retreat up in the mountains. And while waiting for room assignments, struck up a conversation with a lovely woman in line. And now, 8 years later, we are married and have two children. And that woman, Seville, Uh, she's Canadian, and we spent the first year and a half of our relationship and then marriage. We got married almost a year and a half after we met. Um, started traveling together, where she had been a dental hygienist in Toronto and kind of left that to travel in India and become a yoga teacher. She was going back to school to be a counselor. And they said by 2017, we were ready to start a family. And I'll tell you, Nate, if you remember one thing out of this conversation, it's hard to start a family when you're living out of a backpack. It's hard to do that. So um, we were running into some. To be honest with you, it was a difficult time. Like the transition from sort of that, well, you could say vagabond or digital nomad sort of deal to say like being plugged back into the matrix, as I like to describe it. Um, it was a really challenging time for us, but ultimately, like we managed to make it work. Where a buddy of mine I had met at the firm in 2010, a guy who became a good friend of mine while we worked there, had basically started at that firm to run their. It was a firm out in New Jersey, and so he was going to run their office in St. Louis. And for better or worse, he decided to have his first hire be this idiot who'd been wandering around and God knows where for the last 4 years. And so I took the chance at joining Joe, went back to St. Louis, Seville, and it had some school to finish, but then she moved down. And yeah, our first kiddo, we got two now, but our son Wilder joined us in November 2018. So it all kind of fell into place fairly, almost like it was how we planned it. Almost. It was not how we planned it, but there you go. There's the meandering answer to that question.
I mean, listen, we all have a plan, but sometimes it doesn't work out. But it's the way you react to how it doesn't work out is what really matters at the end of the day. You make it work no matter what. And I have to say, congratulations on having children. That's a wonderful thing. I hope to have children myself one day. I'm always usually late on the congrats, but I'm saying it now. I'm getting it in now. But
Thank you.
I want to talk about Contender because I saw a video.
Mhm.
You guys were like meeting with each other in like a video game, and it was like you were playing Terraria, but you were actually talking to each other. It was actually a team meeting, and I was fascinated by it because I love video games. I'm a real gamer, I have to say. So I saw
Mm.
that and I was fascinated. But can you tell us a little bit about Contender? What is it? What do you do there? So on and so forth.
Sure. So yeah, what you're referring to there is it's a platform called Gather Town, and it's basically like virtual offices for remote teams where you can set up your little map, you can customize it, you can have your teammates there, and when you can be in your different places and you can chat. There's a chat function, but then when you walk up to somebody, then the Zoom windows pop up. So it actually creates this dynamic. Yeah, it creates this dynamic that is sort of like a real office where, when I'm in there this morning, my sister, who helps with our ops, she walks up, or one of my account managers just kind of pops up on my screen there, or it's funny. But how Contender came to be was, I'm gonna be efficient with this one, but as I mentioned, leaving the law at 39, not knowing what I was gonna do. Uh, when we moved up to Canada, the firm had been really gracious. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Partners off the table, but you're all right. And I knew that I was not. It wasn't a long term solution. So started thinking about what I was going to do next. Ended up hatching a plan with a good friend of mine, Josh Aranda, who is actually my partner in Contender. And we hatched a plan for me to join his consulting company called Mission Matters Group. You mentioned at the beginning. And we crafted a business development role, and they did mainly Salesforce implementations for nonprofits. It was fairly random from what I'd been doing. And one of the things he told me was, you need to learn how to do LinkedIn. And I was like, what? Okay, fine. And like any good lawyer, I had ignored LinkedIn throughout my time in practice. I had no interest in the platform whatsoever. But I started paying more attention and started just like poking around. Ended up taking a course, like a little $100 course on how you make stuff happen on LinkedIn. And that course, Justin Welsh's operating system, ended up just busting my world open, where the platform opened up in this new way. It just turned into this totally dynamic space where I was able to connect with people who were interested in the same things I was interested in. And unlike my experience with other social media platforms at that time, Facebook, Instagram, um, they were really substantive, positive conversations that people were having. And I ended up just really taking to the platform. Started posting daily in 2023 in January. And basically by September of that year, a buddy of mine, another friend of mine named Evan Chasteen, who had a digital marketing agency, people had been asking me to help them with their LinkedIn presence. Like, how are you doing what you're doing? Can you help me? And Evan asked if I would be interested in trying ghostwriting on LinkedIn. And I said, no, man, no, I'm not interested in that. And then he told me what this client of his was paying. I said, okay, I'll consider that. Yeah, we could talk about that. That was a roofer out of Georgia, my first ghostwritten post. And that first post, like, this guy had been posting every week for a year, and his best post had gone to something like 1,800 people see views. And our first one went, from that 1,800 to 25,000 on our first one. And I'm like, okay, well, so this is kind of easy, interesting. And from there, then it wasn't long before I just saw, okay, almost no lawyers understand how to use this platform properly. And so there, it just sort of turned into this confluence of, nobody knows, very few people understood how to use LinkedIn in a way that could gather attention, because we all learned it the same way, which is to say, it's for announcing when you get a new job or for sharing press releases, right? And I basically started messaging people in my network, lawyers, and saying, hey, I'm thinking about starting this thing. Would this be interesting to you at all? And one of them said yes, a plaintiff's lawyer, trial lawyer out of my hometown, and started working with him in at the beginning of October 2022. And by Halloween, like literally the end of the month, I went all in. And Josh was like, I'll be your investor or your partner. Be my partner. And for the last 18 months now, just been building a business around helping, I say, mission-driven lawyers and leaders. They build magnetic presences on LinkedIn. Our vision is expanding well beyond LinkedIn at this point, but that's what I've been doing, man. So that team in the digital virtual office, I'm fortunate to have some really good people around me, uh, where we've got 7 team members who are spread across 4 countries, 4 countries, 3 continents. Um, and yeah, it feels like we're just getting warmed up on all this stuff. But that wasn't efficient at all. I told you I was going to be efficient. I wasn't.
I thought it was great. I thought it was great. I learned tremendously. I know Justin Welsh, the solo entrepreneur. He has been very inspirational for me. I actually found out about him not too long ago, which is unfortunate. But now I know him, so that's fortunate. So I've read a bunch of his posts. He's been very helpful in terms of figuring out what I should do with LinkedIn. But I think to your point though, once again, open to the opportunities. And universe is on your side on that one. Finding an opportunity like that, being able to do it, being able to now do it for as long as you have. And I think especially you've hit a big point because LinkedIn is the place to be right now. It is absolutely the place to be. There's so much going on. There's so many people. And shout out Reid Hoffman, of course. If Reid Hoffman didn't exist and didn't make LinkedIn, I wouldn't be here on this interview right now. So I just think LinkedIn right now, and that's why it's I've been able to do so much and have so many great people on my podcast is because LinkedIn is now becoming this totally new thing. It's not just
Mm.
job announcements anymore. It's thought leaders. It's people who are giving actionable insights. It's people who are cultivating communities that can help each other out, give people references and just build beautiful things. I love beautiful things being built. That's why I love archaeology. But um, other than that, we can go to our last 5 questions here. The first of the 5 questions is something I've been talking about over the past couple episodes that just through my journey of doing this podcast and talking to people, there is a new era of the law on the way. We are on the precipice of something new because more people are moving towards AI technologies, more people are moving towards digital marketing, ghostwriting, just like yourself. There's more and more expansion of this technology and a moving away of the tradition of the law becoming this new formed era. And that leads me to my question of what does your tech stack look like? What sort of products are you using? I know this isn't legal specific for you, but just in terms of what you're using in terms of your company, anything like that, some products that you recommend people that they use that you've had found very helpful.
Right on. Um, well, we use Google Suite. We use ClickUp as basically our hub for running our business. Um, our video setup, I think we're actually transitioning from Zoom shortly, but we still use Zoom. We've been using a tool called Parrot AI, which is our video transcript service for basically all our content calls. I use Authored Up. Actually, I recently transitioned to Authored Up as the LinkedIn analytics tool, and it's also great for um, like drafting posts and for like you can look over all your previous posts. You can see what's done really well. You can it's got a ton of functionality. I've actually been blown away by this one. So shout out to the Authored Up folks who lured me away from a competitor who shall not be named. Um, Beyond that, anything else essential? I think those are probably the essential tools that we use for our business. Well, and then GatherTown, of course, where we digitally hang out in a map that looks like Zelda.
I really enjoyed that video, I have to say. When I saw that, I was like, this is insane. Um, my tech stack is just Grammarly. If I didn't have Grammarly, I don't know what would happen to myself in my writing. Because I think I'm not even not this is just an endorsement of Grammarly. Because now I love the integration with the Safari. So like when I'm using Google Docs, it will just instantly give me the recommendations with I love it so much. You know,
Nice.
it works so much. But fourth to last question, we talked about you talked about you read a book a week for that 2 year period. So this is it, live on the Lawyers in the Making podcast. Tony, what are your book recommendations? Doesn't have to be about the law, just some of your favorite books. You said The Alchemist before, but what are some other ones?
Yeah. So tell you what, I will give you the books that have become required reading for Contender. Is that what I've started doing is that when you join our team, you're just going to receive these 4 books. And there will be a test. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield is a book that has had a huge impact on me. It's about creativity, this idea of resistance, the force that pushes back on us whenever we try to make anything better. Seth Godin's The Dip is a book that is, well, all of these have had big impacts on me. Actually, a new book on this list, Unreasonable Hospitality, is one that I ran across recently by a restaurateur named Will Guidera, who came out of Danny Meyer's company, Union Square Hospitality Group, and took over this restaurant in New York City. And just say he and a chef he was partnered with grew it to be the best restaurant in the world. So there's some stuff in there about like standards and the pursuit of greatness and being the best in the world and what that's like. And it's kind of where my head and my heart are at right now on what we're doing. So I said, wait, I should know what the 4th book is on that. Like, are there? No, you know what? That 4th thing is a podcast. It wasn't even that 4th thing isn't a book. It's a podcast. You want the podcast, right?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Uh, you listen to Acquired at all? We talked about Acquired, right?
Well, I don't think I have.
Okay, cool. I'm going to send you the link to this one. Acquired is a podcast where these 2 guys basically do deep dives on companies and their stories. And there was an episode they did about Hermes, the French luxury brand. This company's been around for 200 years, and just like the commitment to craftsmanship and excellence, like along the way, where like every handbag they make is still made by hand by one person from beginning to end. And so just like in this world where so much is getting made by, like, how much can we make as fast as we can with as little inputs as possible? There's something really beautiful and powerful about, we're just gonna make the best stuff in the world by just having the best technique and the most talented people, most committed to their craft. And that is going to be incredibly valuable in a different way. So there's a list for you, Nate.
Do you have any other podcast recommendations?
I mean, hardcore history would be I mean, that when you say the GOAT, I think of Dan Carlin as oh, you said OG. You said Tim Ferriss is the OG. I think of Dan Carlin as the OG. Rogan helped him come to prominence like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but I think Dan was doing it before Joe Rogan started. So, yeah. And then the My First Million guys, that's I've gone down the rabbit hole of that business podcast. I love listening to those guys.
Oh, they keep it entertaining. That's why it's so wonderful.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love My First Million. And they're the type of people, they'll bring people on that people may not know, but I know Brian Johnston, the guy who's like,
Mm.
taking his like son's blood or whatever and like trying to be the most I don't even know how to explain what he's
He's trying
doing.
to stop aging.
Yeah, he's
He's
trying to
trying to
stop
make it
aging.
so, yeah.
I'm unsure
Yeah.
if he could, but it seems like he's kind of pulling it off. But they had him on like a year and a half
Mhm.
before he even was really known because he was like a tech guy. He had sold this company for like millions of dollars, and then he started doing this thing, and they had caught wind of that, so they had him on. They said, "Oh, the episode with Rob Deerdeck, the two episodes with Rob Deerdeck are unbelievable. They are like, I think they're two of my favorites. They're insane.
Right
He's
on.
insane. He is amazing. He has totally flipped his whole life around. He's like the most efficient person ever. I know from that episode, someone had actually made a company based on the what he was doing. So basically everything that he did in his life, he literally built out a software where it will keep track of everything that he does. So like if he took his supplements, did he go to the gym? When did he wake up? And he kept track of every single thing. So he knows exactly what he's doing. And then as time went on, he could improve. Oh, it's just, I can't recommend that episode enough. But third to last question here. What are the types of things that you consume, not food, consume on a daily basis, either that be through social media, so Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, Substack? What are some favorite people that you follow that that you would recommend to people? What is crossing the transom of Tony's mind on a daily basis?
That's a good question. Uh, so those podcasts do tend to be on. My social media diet tends to be pretty LinkedIn specific. Um, in terms of specific people to follow, well, so for the purposes of this podcast, say people who are in law school, lawyers, people thinking about that profession. A few people I'll throw out. Well, I'm trying to think of it if any of these people have already been on the podcast. You haven't had Chad Aboot on your podcast yet,
I
have
have
you?
not, but I can.
Okay. Yeah, I think you probably will. So Chad, uh, lawyer out of Toronto, who's uh, he has a consulting coaching business now about helping people find a career that aligns with their gifts. I think that's the language he uses. Um, say Charlie Mann, he has a podcast called "They Don't Teach This in Law School." Um, he's become a good friend of mine, and he's one of the sharpest people around talking about uh, basically how to build a successful law firm. Um, Brittany Leonard is a GC out of Florida who's doing some uh, inspiring stuff, and she also doesn't pull punches. And as being a woman coming up in the profession, and I had her on my podcast about LinkedIn like 18 months ago, and she was doing well as a lawyer then, and it really seems like now she's hitting her stride in a way that she was already pretty big then, but she's killing it. So those are three people who come to mind in the legal space. That's like really good to follow.
Happy to hear that. You gave me some guest recommendations there, secretly. But second to last question. You're always you got Contender, you're working, but what is an ideal Friday night or Sunday morning look for Tony?
Mm. Um, well, I've the older I get, the farther I run. So yeah, my weekend mornings are when I get my longer training runs in for when I'm training for races, which I'm doing right now. So the Sunday morning is like uh, the weather cooperates, and I'm able to get out, at least spend part of that run on trails out in the woods up here, and just kind of unplugging and just turning off the brain for a little while. Um, yeah, how's that for an answer?
It was perfect. I can't complain with that answer. Doing marathons? Are you doing a marathon, half marathon?
This will be 100K. As I'm training for my second 100K.
That
Yeah,
that is
that's
insane. But I have to say, kudos to you. That's really impressive. That is insanely impressive. I gotta do 100K now. I'm gonna do 100K now.
okay.
100.
Come on. Come on out.
Get me going right now. I'll start running right after this. I'll be running around the block. The last question, Tony. I do this at the end of every episode. What are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, and the legal professionals out there in the world?
Mm. Uh, I'll end with something that is in that post from this morning and something that has been key for me. Just this idea that if you are on a path that where it feels like you're living a story for success that was written for somebody else, you have options. And it may not feel like you have options, uh, but we do. So we can find a way to pause, try to pause, create a little bit of space, let ourselves dream about what another path might look like. And I'm not saying torching the legal career necessarily or getting off the path entirely like I did. But there are a lot of ways to be a lawyer. There are a lot of different ways to practice law. And if you're on a path that just isn't a good fit, like it's worth trying to find a way to create space to think about, dream about, discern what might be a better fit, and then go try something else.
Poetically
Let's
said,
go with that.
Tony. Absolutely poetically said. You're speaking to the message of this podcast. There is no straight path. It's only your own unique journey. You got your own unique skills. We all have our own unique skill sets. And it's just about finding where they fit in this world. Because I'll tell you what, they fit somewhere. They fit somewhere.
Mm.
I know that well. Tony knows that well. Everyone knows that well. But Tony, that's the podcast. That's all we got. So thank you so much for doing this, coming on the podcast, spreading your wisdom, spreading your experience, and your raw honesty. I appreciate that so much. And for everyone out there listening, check us out. Lawyersinthemaking.substack.com. Lawyers in the Making, one word, substack.com. And I will see you in the next one.